Hello, this is Kelly Ellsroth. I am one of the instructors for Social Science 200. I'm making this recording in 2014 in order to clarify some of the material you are reading about the methods used by social scientists that help us develop our theories about human behaviors. This week, your learning outcomes include being able to identify the historical and philosophical foundations of the social sciences and how this body of knowledge relates to the natural sciences and humanities. However, I am going to focus on the two learning outcomes listed here on this slide about defining science and how it applies to the social sciences, and about the methods of research used by social scientists. I want to begin with a clarification of where we sit compared to other areas of study. If you think about the general education requirements you're filling in your program of study at MID, you may recognize the headings on this slide. Everyone is required to have some coursework in the natural sciences, humanities, and the social sciences. For example, you may have taken a biology or chemistry class as a natural science requirement. You have or will also take some humanities. The class may have humanities in the title, or you may have taken another subject considered a study in humanities if you took philosophy or religion or literature. This class, Social Science 200, is a survey of the social sciences. There is overlap between these three bodies of knowledge. For example, both the natural sciences and social sciences will apply the scientific method to acquire more knowledge. They may also overlap in some topics. Again, another example, modern day psychology would include information from biological studies. Geology might have some overlap with geography, in that geology studies the physical world and geography would look at how we interact with that physical world. The humanities study the human condition by studying our art and spirituality, whereas the social sciences also study the human condition, but by including its structures and systems and in its application of the scientific method. I did want to just clarify some things in the reading before you got into the material about the research method. In this chapter, Strada is trying to give you information about how we got to social scientism. And so he presents material about the history of our civilization, our human history, and some important historical eras that influenced how we got to these three bodies of knowledge. And there's also some material explaining the beginning of the social sciences in particular as fields of study and even as professions. Then you get to a section where he is including an explanation of an internal debate in the field in order for you to be aware of the limitations of using science to study human behavior. And so there's a discussion about social humanism versus social scientism. And what you're getting at there is the distinction between the humanities and social sciences. So for the paper you're writing for this class, you'll want to focus on social scientism in order to be able to discuss the methods. But let me start by also talking about what science is. A lot of times in my psychology classes and in this class, students limit themselves to thinking of science as being that part of their schedule that included biology, chemistry, and physics. Science, by definition, is broader than that. Science is referring to an approach that we use to gain knowledge about some subject or phenomenon we're interested in. So, biology as a science might be interested in cells. Chemistry as a science is interested in chemicals and molecules. Psychology as a science is interested in human behavior and mental processes. What they share is that they want to be systematic in their approach in gathering information and gathering more knowledge, and try to find methods that help us to try to be objective, especially in the social sciences where we are studying, in a sense, ourselves. We have to find ways to try to remove as much bias as we can so that the evidence we collect is empirical, meaning that we can observe it and other people can also observe it. It's measurable somehow, and therefore it's verifiable by other researchers. In science, we're trying to describe what we see. Sometimes we're also trying to explain why something is happening. And many people in the social sciences are trying to apply that scientific work to also try to predict what might happen in the future And sometimes that's an effort to try to control that information or control that behavior as well. All of the evidence then is an attempt to build theory. A theory is not just an opinion. It's a way that we've tried to organize that evidence into a set of assumptions and explanations. And it's been collected through scientific methods. And so they're generated and they get refined further through ongoing scientific research. To say you don't believe in a theory then is not really the best wording. Neither is it to say about a valid scientific theory that it's just a theory. When you do that, you are equating a theory to something that does or does not exist, or you are equating it to someone's opinion. If someone has a theory and we say it's just an opinion, then you are also implying that all opinions are equal. I think we can agree that while everyone forms their own opinions, not all opinions are based on equally reliable or valid evidence. Theories are not just opinions. They are based on facts from empirical evidence. Are theories all true? No, certainly not. Not meaning that they're completely false, but that perhaps we may come across evidence at some point that continues to refine a theory. And in science, we should try to keep an air of skepticism to continue to look for more information about when and why something is true, as well as when and why it may not be true. And that leads me to a discussion of the scientific method. You have likely encountered the scientific method before. Sometimes writers will combine some of these steps. For example, in texts that I use in my psychology courses, the scientific method is often explained in 4 bullet points rather than these 6. However, the point is the process that is used by scientists, and that process is in this order. So whether in biology or psychology, chemistry or anthropology, it begins with an understanding of what is already known about a topic. The scientist or the scientific team is interested in. They will read about other research on that same topic. That's what that literature review step is about. That will lead then to an informed hypothesis. A hypothesis is a statement that's clearly predicting what we think will be a relationship between some variables, and it needs to be written so that it is testable and will often clearly identify then what is being measured. For example, a hypothesis in the field of psychology may say people who have higher scores on a psychology test of self-esteem will have lower scores on a measure of depression. Next, the scientist has to decide how the study will be conducted. That's the 3rd bullet point. And you see in the indented bullet point a list of methods specifically used by social scientists. These can become more specific if you studied further into one of those disciplines. For example, there are quasi-forms of experiments and there are laboratory observations used by psychologists. After the methodology of the study is determined, the scientists then would conduct the study to collect the data. That data can get organized and often quantitatively so that we can analyze it, sometimes using statistics. And finally, from that information, the scientist draws some conclusions and attempts to share the conclusions with others. This means going back to the hypothesis and stating whether the statement of prediction was supported by the evidence or not. These steps actually can be better understood as a cycle because the conclusions should then lead to more questions and more research. It becomes a part of that literature review. So if I was going to test the hypothesis about the relationship between self-esteem and depression, I would have collect data through psychological tests. And when I collect the data, I'm going to organize it so that I can then do statistical analysis, probably what we call a correlation. And then I find out if in fact there is a strong relationship between those 2 variables of self-esteem and depression. It may get published so that other people know about it and continue to study why those things are related. Okay, so for your paper, we asked you to consider research designs. I wanted to point out that sometimes these are called methods, but that can be confusing because you've just talked about the scientific method. Perhaps a better term for The scientific method would be to think of that as the process steps. And one of those process steps is choosing this particular method or design. As you look at those that are listed in your textbook, I encourage you to consider looking at more information on each design for further understanding. The explanations in your assigned reading only takes up 2 pages, so it's very brief. When you do look that up, make sure you are looking for examples of how it might be used in a social science. Let me give you some examples. Case studies are referred to in multiple areas of study. They're used in management research, they're used to teach students, they're used in the medical profession, but those are not examples relevant to this class. Think of how case studies would be used by a social scientist. What I hope for you to see is that different questions are going to lead to those different designs. And then what we know, because of the limitations of each design, will limit what we can interpret or the conclusions we can draw from the data that we collect. For example, a survey may tell us about the attitudes of a group of participants in a point of time about a topic, let's say in political science, but it doesn't tell us why they feel that way. We can say that this group of people differs from another group of people in a personality trait, but again, we might not know why just by having them take the personality test. So we are going to be careful about saying that something causes another thing or that something is always true. We want to make sure we're specifying when it's true. The reason that we have you doing this now is so that as we get into the disciplines later on, you'll have a better understanding of how the knowledge about those disciplines has been gained. And then that can lead to you having a better critical eye when you hear about findings in social science research. So hopefully that clears some things up in your reading. And